Right now, as you're watching this, there's a woman somewhere in this world who's looking at her phone, staring at a message from a guy she was initially attracted to, and she's feeling something she didn't expect to feel. Disgust. Not because he's ugly, not because he's poor, not because he lacks intelligence or charm. She's disgusted because in the span of just a few interactions, he managed to completely destroy any attraction she had for him by displaying one simple thing that repels women faster than anything else on this planet: desperation. The harsh reality that most men refuse to accept is that desperation isn't just unattractive, it's relationship poison. It's the invisible killer of attraction that operates silently in the background, sabotaging your chances before you even realize what's happening. And here's what's truly terrifying about desperation. You can be desperate without even knowing it. You can think you're being romantic, thoughtful, or persistent, while in reality, you're broadcasting neediness so loudly that women can sense it from miles away. I've spent the last 15 years studying human psychology, attraction dynamics, and the behavioral patterns that separate men who naturally attract women from those who repel them. I've analyzed thousands of interactions, studied the work of masters like Robert Greene, Mystery, and David D'Angelo, and what I've discovered will shock you. The difference between a man who attracts women effortlessly and one who struggles isn't looks, money, or even confidence. It's the ability to recognize and eliminate desperate behaviors that most men don't even know they're exhibiting. Today, I'm going to reveal the 9 most destructive mistakes that make you look desperate, and more importantly, I'm going to show you exactly how to eliminate them from your behavioral repertoire forever. But I need you to understand something before we dive deep into this material. These aren't just dating tips or pickup techniques. These are fundamental principles of masculine psychology that will transform not just how women see you, but how you see yourself. The first mistake that screams desperation louder than a neon sign is overtexting. And this goes far beyond just sending too many messages. Overtexting is a complex behavioral pattern that reveals deep-seated insecurities about your own value and worth. When you send multiple texts without receiving a response, when you follow up your messages with explanations or apologies, when you feel the compulsive need to fill every moment of silence with digital communication, you're essentially telling a woman that you have nothing better to do than wait for her attention. Robert Cialdini, in his groundbreaking work on persuasion, identified scarcity as one of the most powerful psychological triggers for attraction. When something is abundant and easily available, we naturally assign it less value. When you're constantly texting, constantly available, constantly responding within seconds, you're making yourself abundant. You're communicating that your time, attention, and energy are worthless because you're willing to give them away so freely. The psychology behind overtexting runs deeper than most men realize. It's rooted in what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement anxiety. Every time you send a text, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine in anticipation of a response. When that response doesn't come, anxiety builds, and your brain tricks you into believing that sending another text will relieve that anxiety. It's the same psychological mechanism that keeps people addicted to slot machines, and it's just as destructive to your attractiveness. But here's where most advice gets it wrong. The solution isn't to follow arbitrary rules like waiting 3 hours before responding or only texting on certain days. The solution is to develop what I call outcome independence. This means genuinely not needing a response to feel good about yourself. It means having a life so rich and fulfilling that a text conversation is just a small, pleasant addition to your day, not the highlight you've been waiting for. The second mistake that destroys attraction is seeking validation through compliments and approval-seeking behavior. Most men have been conditioned from childhood to believe that the way to win someone's affection is through praise and validation. They shower women with compliments about their appearance, constantly seek approval for their decisions, and fish for reassurance about where they stand in the relationship. What they don't understand is that validation-seeking behavior triggers the same psychological response in women as desperation. When you constantly compliment a woman's appearance, you're not making her feel good about herself. You're revealing that you're easily impressed by surface-level qualities. You're showing her that your standards are low and that you don't require much to be won over. David D'Angelo understood this principle when he developed his concept of cocky comedy. The reason why playful teasing is more attractive than constant compliments isn't because women enjoy being insulted. It's because teasing demonstrates that you have standards, that you're not easily impressed, and that you evaluate women based on more than just their looks. The deeper issue with validation seeking is that it reverses the natural dynamic of attraction. In healthy romantic dynamics, both people should be earning each other's approval, but when you constantly seek validation, you position yourself as the one who needs to prove their worth while she sits in judgment. This creates what psychologists call a power imbalance, where one person holds all the cards and the other becomes increasingly desperate to win their favor. The third mistake is what I call social media stalking and digital overinvestment. In the age of Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat, men have more opportunities than ever to display desperate behavior, and most are taking full advantage of these opportunities without realizing it. Liking every photo immediately after it's posted, commenting with heart eye emojis and flame symbols, watching every story within minutes of it being uploaded, these behaviors don't make you seem interested, they make you seem obsessed. The psychology behind social media desperation is rooted in what researchers call parasocial interaction. This is when someone develops a one-sided emotional connection with another person through media consumption. When you're constantly engaging with a woman's social media content, your brain starts to create the illusion of a relationship that doesn't actually exist. You begin to feel like you know her intimately because you've seen her daily activities, her thoughts, her experiences, but she has no corresponding emotional investment in you. This creates a dangerous psychological trap. The more you invest emotionally in someone through digital stalking, the more desperate you become for real-world validation from them. You start to believe that your consistent digital attention deserves some kind of reward or recognition, and when it doesn't come, you either increase your digital investment or become resentful and bitter. The fourth mistake that signals desperation is the inability to say no or set boundaries. Men who are desperate for female attention often become yes men, agreeing to everything, accommodating every request, and bending over backwards to avoid any potential conflict or disappointment. They believe that being agreeable and accommodating will make them more attractive, but the opposite is true. When you can't say no, when you have no boundaries, when you're willing to sacrifice your own needs and desires to please someone else, you're not being attractive, you're being a doormat. The psychology of boundary setting is directly connected to respect and attraction. When someone has clear boundaries and is willing to enforce them, it signals that they have self-respect and standards. It shows that they value themselves enough to say no to things that don't align with their values or interests. Conversely, people who have no boundaries signal that they don't respect themselves. And if you don't respect yourself, why should anyone else? Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic philosopher, wrote extensively about the importance of maintaining your principles even when it's difficult or inconvenient. The Stoic concept of maintaining your virtue regardless of external circumstances is directly applicable to modern dating dynamics. When you compromise your values, change your schedule, or abandon your goals to accommodate someone who hasn't earned that level of investment from you, you're displaying the kind of weakness that destroys attraction. The fifth mistake is emotional overinvestment in early-stage relationships. This manifests as talking about the future too soon, becoming jealous or possessive before exclusivity has been established, or allowing your emotional state to be completely dependent on how things are going with one particular woman. Emotional overinvestment is particularly destructive because it creates a feedback loop of desperation. The more emotionally invested you become, the more you have to lose, which makes you more desperate to control the outcome, which pushes the other person away, which makes you even more desperate. The psychology behind emotional overinvestment is rooted in what psychologists call attachment anxiety. People with attachment anxiety have an excessive need for closeness and reassurance in relationships. They interpret normal relationship fluctuations as signs of impending abandonment, which causes them to increase their efforts to secure the relationship, often through clingy or controlling behaviors that ultimately drive their partner away. The Stoic philosophers understood this principle thousands of years ago. Epictetus taught that we should focus only on what is within our control and accept what is not. When you become emotionally overinvested in the early stages of dating, you're essentially trying to control another person's feelings and decisions, which is impossible and will only lead to frustration and desperate behavior. The sixth mistake is the inability to walk away, or the fear of losing someone who isn't investing equally in the relationship. This manifests as staying in situationships that aren't progressing, accepting disrespectful treatment because you're afraid of being alone, or continuing to pursue someone who has clearly indicated they're not interested. The inability to walk away is perhaps the most unattractive quality a man can possess because it signals that he believes this particular woman is the best he can do. The psychology of walking away is directly connected to what economists call the sunk cost fallacy. This is the tendency to continue investing in something because of previously invested resources, even when it's clear that continuing is not in your best interest. In dating, this manifests as staying with someone who doesn't treat you well simply because you've already invested time and emotional energy in the relationship. But walking away isn't just about ending relationships that aren't working. It's about having the self-respect and confidence to know that you deserve someone who is genuinely excited about being with you. When you can walk away from people who don't appreciate your value, you naturally become more attractive to those who do. It's a paradox of attraction that the more willing you are to lose someone, the less likely you are to actually lose them. The seventh mistake is trying too hard to impress through material displays or accomplishments. This includes bragging about money, constantly talking about your achievements, buying expensive gifts too early in the relationship, or trying to solve every problem with your wallet. The psychology behind this behavior is the belief that your value as a man is determined by what you can provide rather than who you are as a person. Mystery, one of the most influential pickup artists of the early 2000s, understood this principle when he developed his concept of demonstrating higher value. But most men misunderstood his teachings and began to focus on impressing women with external achievements rather than developing genuine inner confidence and charisma. The difference is crucial. When you try to impress someone with your accomplishments or possessions, you're essentially bribing them for their attention. You're saying that you don't believe you're interesting or attractive enough on your own merit. The eighth mistake is lacking a life purpose or mission beyond romantic relationships. Men who are desperate often have no hobbies, passions, or goals that exist independently of their dating life. Their entire sense of self-worth and daily happiness depends on their romantic success or failure. This creates a level of neediness that is impossible to hide and incredibly unattractive to women who are looking for a partner, not a dependent. The Stoic philosophers emphasized the importance of having a clear life mission that transcends personal relationships. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of focusing on your duty and contribution to society rather than seeking validation from others. When you have a clear purpose that drives you, when you're passionate about something beyond romantic relationships, you naturally become more attractive because you're not needy for external validation. Women are attracted to men who have their own lives, their own goals, and their own sources of fulfillment. They want to be a valuable addition to your life, not the entire focus of it. When your happiness and self-worth depend entirely on romantic success, you put enormous pressure on any potential relationship, which often causes it to collapse under that pressure. The ninth and final mistake is the inability to read social cues and adjust your behavior accordingly. This manifests as continuing to pursue someone who has given clear signals of disinterest, not recognizing when you're being too intense or overwhelming, or failing to understand the subtle dynamics of attraction and timing. Social calibration is perhaps the most important skill in all of human interaction, and men who lack it will struggle regardless of how well they avoid the other 8 mistakes. The psychology of social calibration is rooted in emotional intelligence, which includes the ability to read nonverbal communication, understand social contexts, and adjust your behavior based on feedback from others. When you can't read social cues, you often continue behaviors that are pushing people away because you're not receiving the feedback that would normally cause you to adjust your approach. But social calibration goes beyond just reading obvious signals of interest or disinterest. It's about understanding the subtle rhythms of human interaction, knowing when to push and when to pull back, recognizing the difference between someone who needs space and someone who has lost interest entirely. It's about developing what psychologists call theory of mind, which is the ability to understand that other people have their own thoughts, feelings, and motivations that may be completely different from your own. Now that we've identified these 9 mistakes, let's talk about the deeper psychological patterns that create desperate behavior in the first place. Most desperation stems from what psychologists call an external locus of control, which means believing that your happiness and self-worth are determined by factors outside of your control, particularly other people's opinions and behaviors. Men who display desperate behaviors often have what's called a scarcity mindset when it comes to relationships. They believe that romantic opportunities are rare and precious, so when they encounter someone they're attracted to, They feel like they have to do everything possible to secure that person's interest. This creates a paradox where the very behaviors they use to try to secure interest actually destroy it. The solution to desperation isn't to follow a set of rules or techniques. It's to develop what the Stoics called autarkia, which means self-sufficiency or independence. When you're truly self-sufficient, when your happiness and self-worth come from internal sources rather than external validation, you naturally stop displaying desperate behaviors because you no longer need other people's approval to feel good about yourself. This is why developing yourself as a man is so crucial to success in relationships. When you have your own goals, your own sources of fulfillment, your own standards and boundaries, you naturally become more attractive because you're not needy. You become someone who adds value to others' lives rather than someone who needs others to validate your worth. The transformation from desperate to attractive isn't just about changing your behaviors, although that's important. It's about changing your fundamental relationship with yourself and with other people. It's about moving from a place of neediness to a place of abundance, from seeking validation to offering value, from trying to get love to being someone who is naturally lovable. Understanding these 9 mistakes and their underlying psychology is just the beginning. The real work is in developing the self-awareness to recognize when you're falling into these patterns and the discipline to choose different behaviors, even when your emotions are pushing you toward desperation. It's about building a life that's so rich and fulfilling that no single person has the power to make or break your happiness. The journey from desperation to authentic masculine attractiveness is not a quick fix or a simple behavioral adjustment. It's a fundamental rewiring of your psychological operating system that requires what the ancient Greeks called eudaimonia, which means human flourishing through virtue and excellence. This transformation touches every aspect of your life, from how you wake up in the morning to how you interact with strangers on the street. One of the most profound realizations you'll have as you eliminate these desperate behaviors is that women have always been able to sense your internal state far more accurately than you imagined possible. They can detect desperation not just through your obvious behaviors, but through subtle micro-expressions, body language patterns, vocal tonality, and even the energy you bring into a room. This is because women have evolved over thousands of years to be exceptionally skilled at reading male psychology for survival and reproductive success. The concept of what psychologists call emotional contagion explains why desperate men struggle so much in social situations. When you're feeling needy, anxious, or desperate for validation, those emotions literally transfer to the people around you. They begin to feel uncomfortable without even understanding why. Conversely, when you're genuinely content, confident, and self-sufficient, those positive emotions also transfer, making others naturally drawn to your presence. This is why the internal work is so much more important than learning pickup lines or dating techniques. You can memorize every piece of advice about texting, every principle of attraction, every psychological trigger. But if your internal emotional state is one of neediness and desperation, people will sense it regardless of how well you execute the surface-level behaviors. The great seduction masters throughout history understood this principle intuitively. Casanova wasn't successful with women because he used clever techniques or manipulative strategies. He was successful because he genuinely loved and appreciated women. He had a rich life full of art, literature, and adventure, and he approached each interaction with curiosity and playfulness rather than neediness and agenda. His attractiveness came from his authentic enthusiasm for life itself. Similarly, when we look at modern examples of naturally attractive men, we see the same patterns. They're not men who have perfected a set of dating strategies. They're men who have developed themselves so completely that their attractiveness is simply a byproduct of who they've become. They have careers or missions they're passionate about. They maintain strong friendships and social networks. They have hobbies and interests that fulfill them. And they've developed a strong sense of their own identity and values. This is why the advice to just be yourself is both completely correct and completely useless. If your current self is desperate, needy, and validation-seeking, then being yourself will continue to repel the people you're trying to attract. The real advice should be, become someone worth being. Develop yourself into the kind of man who naturally embodies the qualities that create attraction: confidence, purpose, emotional stability, social intelligence, and genuine care for others. The Stoic philosophers had a concept called preferred indifference, which means things that are generally preferable but don't determine your fundamental well-being or virtue. Romantic success should be viewed as a preferred indifferent. It's nice when it happens. It can add joy and fulfillment to your life, but it shouldn't be the determining factor in your happiness or self-worth. When you can genuinely adopt this mindset, when romantic success becomes something you prefer but don't need, you paradoxically become much more likely to achieve it. There's also a crucial distinction between confidence and arrogance that many men struggle to understand. Confidence comes from genuine competence and self-knowledge. It's quiet, stable, and doesn't need external validation to maintain itself. Arrogance, on the other hand, is often a mask for insecurity. It's loud, unstable, and requires constant validation from others to sustain itself. Women are exceptionally skilled at detecting the difference between these two states, and they're attracted to genuine confidence while being repelled by arrogance. The development of genuine confidence requires what psychologists call mastery experiences. These are achievements and accomplishments that prove to yourself that you're capable of growth, learning, and success. They can't be faked or borrowed from others. You have to earn them through sustained effort and dedication. This is why having goals and pursuits outside of dating is so crucial. Every time you improve at something meaningful, every time you overcome a challenge or achieve a goal, you build genuine confidence that others can sense. Another critical aspect of eliminating desperate behavior is understanding the concept of abundance versus scarcity. Men who operate from scarcity believe that opportunities for connection, love, and intimacy are rare and precious. This makes them cling desperately to any potential opportunity, which destroys their attractiveness. Men who operate from abundance understand that the world is full of amazing people and that healthy relationships are built on mutual attraction and compatibility, not on one person convincing the other to stay. Developing an abundance mindset doesn't mean becoming careless or disrespectful in relationships. It means understanding that you have value to offer, that there are many people in the world who would appreciate that value, and that you don't need to compromise your standards or values to maintain someone's interest. It means being willing to walk away from situations that don't serve you, knowing that better opportunities exist. The integration of Stoic principles with modern understanding of attraction psychology creates a powerful framework for masculine development. The Stoic emphasis on virtue, rationality, and emotional regulation aligns perfectly with the qualities that create natural attractiveness. When you can maintain your emotional equilibrium regardless of external circumstances, when you can act from principle rather than impulse, when you can remain kind and respectful even in challenging situations, you demonstrate the kind of emotional strength that is inherently attractive. The practice of negative visualization, a core Stoic exercise, is particularly valuable for overcoming desperation in relationships. This involves regularly imagining the loss of things you value, not to be pessimistic, but to develop appreciation for what you have and resilience for what you might lose. When you can imagine losing a relationship and genuinely know that you would be okay, that you would continue to live a fulfilling life, you free yourself from the desperation that comes from believing you can't survive without that particular person. This psychological freedom transforms every aspect of how you show up in relationships. You become more present because you're not constantly worried about the future of the relationship. You become more authentic because you're not trying to be someone you think the other person wants. You become more generous because you're giving from a place of abundance rather than trying to get something in return. These qualities create a positive feedback loop where your improved behavior leads to better relationship outcomes, which reinforces your confidence and abundance mindset. The transformation process also requires developing what psychologists call distress tolerance, which is the ability to experience difficult emotions without immediately acting to escape or avoid them. Much of desperate behavior comes from the inability to sit with the discomfort of uncertainty, rejection, or loneliness. When you develop the capacity to experience these difficult emotions without immediately trying to fix them, through external validation or desperate actions, you gain tremendous power over your own behavior. Remember, attraction isn't something you can force or manipulate. It's something that emerges naturally when you become the kind of man who doesn't need it. When you stop chasing validation and start living with purpose, when you stop trying to impress and start being impressive, when you stop seeking love and start being lovable, you'll discover that the very thing you were desperately seeking was always within your reach. You just had to stop grasping for it so tightly. The paradox of attraction is that it flows toward those who don't desperately need it. And this isn't cruel or unfair. It's simply the natural order of healthy human psychology. Your job isn't to fight this reality, but to align yourself with it by becoming the kind of man who genuinely doesn't need external validation to feel complete and valuable.